One of our colleagues, a gentleman named Stan Tennant, is the head of a nonprofit research foundation in California called the Nehru Foundation. Tennant and his people have, for about 20 years now, been looking at a series of ancient texts, the oldest texts on the planet. Literally, Hebraic documents, Greek documents, Arabic documents, Mayan codices, the Rig Veda, all the literature, the great literature of our combined cultural heritage has been focused under their microscope because of a set of clues that Tennant found over 20 years ago that the letter forms of the Hebrew Bible, the very letter forms of Genesis, are possibly formed by variants of shadow projections of tetrahedral geometry. Now, if this were true, it would have some very major implications. The point of relevance is that in a conversation after we had found this global planetary pattern of inscribed tetrahedral geometry given to us by something as off the wall as a set of artificial structures possibly on Mars, I said to Stan, well, what do you know about tetrahedra? And he said, read such and such by Coxeter and other topologists. For about 100 years, there have been a series of mathematical papers published in the mainstream scientific literature dealing with higher dimensions. We are familiar with length, width, and height, 3 dimensions. 3 dimensions of space, 1 dimension of time. In relativity, it's called space-time as a contraction. However, this rather arcane subculture of scientists, mathematicians, topologists, have been dealing routinely with 4 dimensions spatially, 5, 6, 7, all the way up now to, I believe, 26 individual dimensions. And the mathematics to describe them are literally unreadable, so I'm not even going to begin to try to get into it. The bottom line, however, was that as I read these papers, it became very apparent that in these mathematical treatises there were descriptions of events that would be occurring in 3 dimensions if you were modeling things going on in 4 dimensions or higher and seeing projections, shadows, back into our familiar 3 dimensions. Now, all of these papers dealt with this as theory, as simply, intellectual gamesmanship, mathematical doodling, back of the envelope things. But we're not supposed to really take the idea of other dimensions seriously, right? Well, one of the things that these papers predicted was that if you were to look at the right kind of sphere rotating in the right way in 3 dimensions, what you're really looking at is more of the sphere in higher dimensions projected back into 3 dimensions, and that would produce vorticular roiling motion in the mathematical equation, in the spatial transform, and those roiling vorticular motions would be focused at 19.5 north and south. There is a problem described in this literature called the problem of the 27 lines on the general cubic surface. It turns out to be an elegant description of an ordinary cube in 3 space and what it looks like in higher dimensions, 4, 5, 6 dimensions. And tallying up the number of angles in the cube, there are 2 interpenetrating tetrahedra as part of this solution. And in fact, there is a set of hypertetrahedra that mathematically will fall out as shadows from these mathematical solutions. And as we looked at this figure, it became obvious that if we look at the solar system, we might, just might, if we were seeing the upwelling point of this mass, we might see the inwelling point of the same mass. The theory being that if you really have a hypersphere, a sphere, a planet that is existing in more than our 3 dimensions, as it rotates, there will be a set of physical forces set up that will transmit back a structure, a signature that you might see on the planet, as we are seeing the 19.5 vortex, which is the first hallmark of any good science. You make a prediction, and then you see if the prediction is fulfilled. Well, when we look at planets, what the predictions said from these papers now, applied to real spinning objects, not theoretical spheres, but real spinning bowls of liquid and gas planets, was that we should see around the poles, particularly the North Pole, a hexagonal pattern, perhaps formed in the clouds. And then I remembered that in 1988, a scientist named D.A. Godfrey had published in Icarus a small paper dealing with time-lapse photography the Voyager missions had taken of the North Pole of Saturn and computer rectified, and lo and behold, there, around the North Pole, is a perfect hexagon, over and over again. And the hexagon is composed of layers of clouds. There are 3 bands, and the clouds are racing backward at about 300 miles per hour, and they're making the turns, each of the turns. The pattern as a whole is rotating with the internal clocked radio period of the planet, which is slightly over 10 hours, I believe, 10 hours, 14 minutes or something like that. That's crucial in a physics, because what it means is the pattern is linked to a property called the bulk angular momentum, the mass spinning of this physical object in 3 dimensions. Now, I mean, look at that. This is stunning, because science is prediction. We now have 2 specific signatures predicted by a formerly theoretical, abstract subculture of mathematical scientists called topologists. And their predictions are that if you rotate a hypersphere, meaning a sphere that extends into more than 3 dimensions that we're familiar with, the effects back from these higher dimensions will give you signatures at 19.5 and a hexagonal pattern in the idealized solution around the rotational pole of rotation. And that, in fact, is exactly what we see. Now, what is that saying? It is saying, screen on, it is saying that perchance, just perchance, during the Voyager mission, we have now secured data that at least one planet in our solar system is somehow connected mathematically to a higher dimensional state space. And that, of course, if we can confirm through further research and further analysis, would be a stunning fact to have beheld.